This is Create the Next from Pro CFO Partners, where every week we explore strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help today's businesses put their financial picture in context.
Welcome back to Create the Next. I'm Chris Bentliff, and I have back with me today Josefina Garcia, and it is so good to see you again. And we are in the very beginning of the year as you and I are, as this episode will be reaching our listeners. And I think it's a great time to connect on who's around me, who's my team, who am I going into this year with, who am I going into the future with. We've done a lot of great conversations here on the podcast about looking back and reflecting and kind of invigorating for ongoing strategy. But I thought today you shared some great ideas together where let's talk about the team and who's around me. And I think sometimes in small businesses, we put a lot of responsibility. That one person is doing a lot of heavy lifting. We think that, well, I have an accountant. Why can't they do X, Y, Z? Or my bookkeeper should be able to help me with X, Y, Z. And maybe I just don't always understand who's who. So welcome. And let's talk about this a little bit. Who do you feel like I should kind of have around me? Who's my core financial team and what are they doing and how do they complement each other and what should I be expecting?
Got it. Thank you so much, Chris, for having me again. I'm super excited to be here, stoked about the new year and helping people better understand their business needs and move forward into 2023 with the full team that they need to be successful during the year.
Yeah.
To answer your question, it's really interesting. And the thought of this conversation really came from there were two triggers. The first one has been going on forever. And it's since I started going to school and telling people that I was studying accounting, I always got, oh, so you can do my taxes. And a lot of accountants will have the same answer that I did. It's like, I can, but I probably won't do much better than TurboTax or one of those service providers because not all accountants are tax accountants. And tax laws change so much all the time. You really need to specialize in something like taxes and generally for industry. So, anytime you hear accountant, they don't necessarily do taxes. They don't necessarily do certain accounting things that kind of the general population know of. There's so many intricacies to it. And then the second trigger for wanting to have this conversation was actually, unfortunately, a conversation that I had with a friend about a business that was shutting down. And the business was shutting down because they failed to do certain things that needed to be done, some payments that didn't go out, some tracking that wasn't happening, some accruals, some cash flow issues. And it's, when I was thinking about it, I was like, well, did they have an accountant in place? And the owner said, yes, I had an accountant in place because they had somebody who did their taxes. Now, a bookkeeper might have caught that. An accountant would have definitely caught it. And a controller, if he'd had a controller in his team, would have most definitely saved him the trouble of the struggle that they had with having to close several of their doors. They had multiple locations because of this. So, when we think of business and we think of accounting and all the intricacies and people get overwhelmed by running a business, it's really easy to forget that, there's steps, there's levels, there's layers to having a business. And yes, a small starting business does not need a controller or a CFO. But a lot of the time we're not educating our business owners into, how big, how much activity, how intricate does my business need to be before I need that other type of accountant, that other type of expert, that other type of support, that other type of partner. And so I wanted to have a conversation about all the different types of main accountants, because there's always going to be niches and little things like that. But
I love what you're sharing around this idea of specialization. And for me, it's I always connect that to skill sets. Like not every, as you pointed out, not every person with financial acumen is also going to be the person to lean on for this. For instance, and I'm excited to get into it with you, thinking strategically about finance is not the role of, let's say, the person who's just, kind of putting together the metrics and reports at the end of the month and submitting them. Like that person might be more minded for just give me the nuts and bolts and I'm going to spit that out. Well, what does it mean? I don't really know what it means. That's not my job. I'm just here to lay this out for you. So what are some of those roles you mentioned? You mentioned a bookkeeper, you mentioned accountant, you mentioned controller.
Yeah.
Talk to me about those responsibilities a little bit. Where do they cross over with somebody else? And where do they cross over with somebody else? And where should I be expecting them to have the answers for me? And where should I not be expecting them to have the answers for me?
Yep. So that's the question. And so to cover it a little bit in general, non-finance, non-accounting terms is we need a doctor. We need a doctor, and a doctor is a doctor is a doctor. But if you broke your leg, are you going to call a dentist?
Love it.
So here's where we need to look at the accounting industry or the accounting field and separate that. And we'll start with the one that everybody knows: your tax preparer, death and taxes. Everybody knows the tax. So the tax accountant is the accountant that most people recognize. This accountant is looking at your personal and or business financial standing as of a specific date. Be it December 31st or another year end that your business uses. This accountant is keeping up with tax laws. Some of the tax accountants that we work with are industry specific. So you may have a tax accountant that's very focused on a specific industry, be it construction, be it dentistry, be it realtors. A lot of accountants, tax accountants know how to deal with the nuances of all these industries. And so when looking for tax preparation, of course, look for a tax accountant. This person's follow the rules, changes over the years, and they keep a pulse of what's happening. And that's who you want to talk to. They're best suited to give you answers about taxes. However, where they're limited is, again, going back, they're only looking at a specific date for your business. So if you send your tax accountant your December 31st balances, do they know that you sold an asset in March? Do they know that you hired a new employee in July? Do they know that you are opening a new revenue stream? These are things that the tax accountant is not generally diving into. So while they'll be able to tell you based on your year-end balances what's going to happen with your tax return, they're not really involved in the day-to-day business. So that's where the asset of having a tax account is. They know the law, they keep a pulse in it, they're current, but where the limitation lies with them is, of course, in the fact that they generally only look at that glimpse, that snapshot at the end of the year.
Should I be expecting that professional to be a leader in helping me understand my minimizing my tax liability, my risk to tax, looking for opportunities to do more? Is that a good responsibility for me to expect that person to have capabilities on?
Capabilities, yes. Unfortunately, that's a service that's generally separate from tax preparation. Some business owners go in and they understand that this person knows taxes and they know what the implications of a business decision is. But if you have not talked to your tax preparer and discussed tax planning, tax strategy, then those are not necessarily services that accountant is going to offer. And then also it depends on how intricate it is. If you are talking about an asset disposition or an asset acquisition, then maybe the tax accountant will be able to tell you for sure what the tax implications are. They will not be the ones to help you bid, seek different pricing, explain how you're going to implement the tool or how you're going to utilize it with your team. It's going to be very, very specific to the tax implications. So again, it's a conversation to have when you do hire a tax accountant. Are you just doing my taxes and giving me a packet of paperwork and we're done? Or are we talking quarterly? Are we talking are we talking before the year's over so that I can make smart tax decisions before the December 31st cutoff? Those are all conversations that you need to have to know the extent to which the accountant can help you. And then if it's really intricate, then you really need somebody in-house who has a little bit of knowledge to then expand beyond the tax implications of the decisions.
Excellent. Just this, if we were to stop our conversation today, I think there'd be a lot of people that were saying, oh, I didn't know that I didn't know what I didn't know, and that's just, I think a lot of small businesses especially are leaning on that tax preparer for more than, as you're pointing out, just more than is the right, the right weight to be putting on that person. Who else is on my team and what are they doing that is distinct from my tax preparer?
Got it. Got it. So let's talk about the bookkeeper. The bookkeeper is another one that a lot of people recognize. The bookkeeper is doing day-to-day data entry, transactions, posting, financial activity as it happens. They are categorizing expenses and revenue. They might send out customer invoices, and they may be processing payroll. They're doing the bulk of the data that you find in an accounting system. The bulk of the work that's done is done by a bookkeeper. And I should probably point out that sometimes that bookkeeper at different levels of business could be the spouse, the cousin, the sister, the brother, kitchen table, and that's the bookkeeper. If you've started your own business and you're doing your own data entry, you're entering your own expenses, you're sending out invoices, you're taking them to the bank, you're maybe reconciling your bank account, you're the bookkeeper. That's what the bookkeeper does. And I think putting the owners or their family and friends that are helping them with the books in that position of the bookkeeper really explains the bookkeeper's role. You can't expect also that bookkeeper to be the tax expert, because it's them. It's they know that the expenses are coming. They know that the invoice went out and they need to collect, but that's so separate from tax. That's so separate from raising capital. That's so separate from accruals and depreciation and all those other words that accountants throw out. So that's where the bookkeeper is. They're doing the grunt, the bulk of the work, but then we got to create those boundaries of entering the data versus analyzing the data versus making decisions and all that. So that's where the bookkeeper is.
Oh, that's a great, I love what you just shared there at the very end. That's a great way of sort of explaining it. And I also think you're right that especially, the sole proprietor, the very early startup where there's 2 or 3 people, you might not even realize that you are founder, also the bookkeeper. Like you're doing these things, you're wearing that hat. This is a responsibility you have. And then it's so natural to offload that to who over here has a pulse that can just help us out. And you're not necessarily even thinking about who's great at this or who's good at this, because in your mind, it's basically data entry. Does that minimize, do you feel like the responsibilities that the skill sets that this person could be bringing to the table? Like what's the difference between a great bookkeeper and a data entry person?
Got it. So a great bookkeeper is kind of thinking a little bit more as payments come in. A data entry person saw a utility bill come through and they entered it in the system and they knew it was utilities and they cut the check and they sent it out. A good bookkeeper or even a great bookkeeper is looking back and saying, does this invoice recognize that we paid last month's balance? Is it just this month's balance? Do I need to break out the utilities between electric and water and, other things that may be invoiced there? And, are they preparing payables reports? Are they running through a process of approval where they're entering these invoices and they're categorizing them and going through an approval process? So it's different layers of service and intricacies that can go into the data entry that turn that person from a data entry person to a bookkeeper.
I feel like as you're describing that, tell me if I'm wrong, that sort of highly skilled bookkeeper begins to share characteristics with an accountant. Is that accurate? Let's talk about the accountant and that person's role.
Yes. So that's exactly right. So there's this spectrum between a bookkeeper, an accountant, and then a higher level controller, CFO. And I think the accountant's role gets really blurred in both directions, towards the bookkeeper's role and then towards that controller and CFO role. So where the boundaries can be put a little bit or set a little bit between the bookkeeper and the accountant is the bookkeeper, again, is going to be doing all that data entry based on documents that they received, based on information that's there. The accountant is thinking a little bit further than what the numbers in front of them. They're thinking perhaps accruals at the end of the month. Did we accrue depreciation? There's no document really that showed up in the mail to tell us that needed to be posted. There's no, until the end of the year, we don't have that information, but the accountant is entering those accruals. The accountant is thinking a little bit different about how the books are closed at the end of the month. The bookkeeper is receiving the documents and the data But the accountant is closing the books in that they're posting those accruals at the end of the month based on expenses that are going to be coming in later. They're analyzing a little bit of the data that's there. They're doing that preliminary look into the data that's a little bit more in depth than just entering the information, because they're able to take that step back. Where the bookkeeper was looking at that piece of paper in front of them, the accountant role and moving towards controller takes a step back and goes, okay, now that we put all these things in the pockets, do the pockets look right? Is that pocket a little bit too heavy compared to what we expect it to be? And so they're taking, again, that information that was on that piece of paper and using it to better present the information.
Interesting. So that accountant has a bit of a visionary skill set. They can start to see what's ahead and prepare for what's ahead. That seems to me then that it's a short trip between that person and the strategic mindset that's involved in the controller or the CFO. And I'm also wondering about, in any of those three, when do I start managing other people on the financial team? Whose role is that? And what, I guess, let's talk about the controller and the CFO and the accountant. I don't know, where do those threads start to come apart, and where do they stay together?
Yeah. And keep in mind that as I'm describing these, it really is affected by the size of the company and their ability to hire these individuals. So a company, that has the revenue to support the team may have a data entry, bookkeeper, accountant, controller, CFO, VP of finance. All these roles are different people. But whenever you're talking about a smaller organization, some of those roles really morph and blend into one another. So again, just starting at the beginning of the chain, we go, bookkeeper, enter the data, the accountant analyzed the data to the extent of closing the books. We move into the controller, then they're analyzing the data further in, where the accountant might have posted those month-end entries, those accruals, those transactions that are going to give you a true picture of what the month's operations look like. The controller is going to take it a step further, and they're going to look at maybe nuances, those margins. Now they're at the controller level. They're no longer manipulating the data that's in the system. They're manipulating the reports that come out of the system. So I think that's where that line lies, where the accountant is still working the books, the controller might not be. But they are using all that data, all that work that was done by the bookkeeper and accountants, and they're turning it and looking at it from different directions to then provide the reports. And at that level, so at the accountant level, you might get standard financial statements, you might get a balance sheet and an income statement. You get into that controller role, you might be getting financials or income statements by revenue stream, by department, by clients, by project. And that's where the deep data analysis really, really takes place. So that transition is where you separate kind of those two roles of manipulating the data that's going into the system versus utilizing the data. But keep in mind that the controller is still using historical data. So it's still things that have already happened or things that have already been posted by the accountant in anticipation of things happening. Where then we bump up to the CFO is where the CFO is taking those reports, taking the data that was prepared by the bookkeeper, the reports that were prepared by the accountants, and the more complex reports that were prepared by the controller, and they're making strategic decisions for the future. They're saying, because this project created this margin or cost this much, or because that client is doing this or that, this is how we need to pivot. These are decisions that we need to make moving forward. This is our forecast. This is our strategy. And a lot of that thought process and that support that the CFO provides expands then beyond the accounting function because of that need to interpret the information that's been given to them into future decisions. So now we're looking at that client, that revenue stream, that project. We're going, okay, next time we have a client with this need, next time we have a project, this is how we should handle it. This is where we find more of those clients. So then he starts being more of a future planning, moving forward decision making.
This is so valuable, Josefina, and I'm so grateful for it, because I think that it really helps us to understand in our business the points of friction as you pointed out, if the size of the business, you might have a whole finance department. And obviously we don't mean to generalize. Everybody's different and everything is different. All situations can be, a bit kind of tailored to who's around you and what's available. But it helps me to be able to see as a leader, this is the pain point that I'm experiencing. For instance, we used to just need a P&L, but now we need these more sophisticated reports or more distinct reports. That tells me, from what you're sharing, I might now need to go seek the resources of this other professional, or we really got something sophisticated going here, team, and we need some strategic leadership where this is concerned. Yeah. Our old bookkeeper, who's been here for 25 years and is super predictable in our family business, that's just not their role necessarily. We might need these new points of assistance. And I think that's really helpful for us to be able to say, because I think sometimes we just don't know that we needed somebody else. As you pointed out with your illustration earlier, nobody meant to make short-sighted decisions. They just didn't know what they didn't know. Do you find that that's true as you're working with especially kind of small and mid-market organizations? They didn't know what they didn't know. And once they do, it helps them to be able to see, okay, this is the team I need to build around me.
Yes, 100%. That is absolutely true. And again, it goes back to the very beginning of, the expectation that you hear accountant and the first thing that pops in your mind is taxes. Or you hear bookkeeper and it's like, oh, the checks went out or the deposit made it to the bank. But in conversation that I'm having much more frequently now as well is the CFO conversation. These smaller businesses that think of CFO as somebody that works big corporate, large companies, multi-billion-dollar companies. But when you describe the role and what they do, what small business doesn't need strategy? What small business doesn't need to look at the information that they have based on what they've been doing to make better decisions? What small business doesn't need to know what clients are not profitable? Because even though they're costing a lot of money. Every business needs to know this information. And unfortunately, when we don't align the things that we need with the expertise required to translate and manage that information, we lose out on a lot. So, that's kind of something that I encounter all too often. And why I really wanted to have this conversation, because I think we escalate things, whenever we think of business, oh, you absolutely have to have an accountant, you have to have a CFO, but we all need the bookkeepers and the accountants. What we need to do is to recognize at what point the expertise and the needs of that person are escalated to a different level. And now we need to bring somebody in.
You're pointing out for me also the value of a fractional professional. I might need some of this stuff, my bookkeeper all the time, my tax accountant seasonally, or my tax preparer seasonally, but I might need my CFO quarterly. I might need my CFO, somebody who can really have a strategic mindset to help me solve a problem, get over a hump, a growth issue, help me understand how to open new, revenue streams or tap into different inventory or manufacturing concerns or whatever. And then I need to lean on my core team, and this person can come back in. Is that true? Do you find that that's part of the value is kind of this ability to come in, be consistent and useful, and then step back when that strategic leadership is no longer top priority?
Also true. I feel like you have the cheat sheet somewhere, like you have all the answers already.
I have all the answers. This is widely known. I have all the answers.
You have all the answers so again, let's go back to the setup. The bookkeeper is there entering stuff. The accountant is there, checking the stuff. The controller is there. And now we know, because the controller did a report, that department that, barely broke even had a cap issue. Maybe their production was capped there, and for whatever reason they were unable to then move past that point. Then what do we need to do? Do we need equipment? Do we need to hire? How do we raise the capital? That's where a fractional CFO comes in, and they're helping you make those strategic decisions, really looking at the numbers and going, again, the controller has given us the information of what happened last quarter. And because of what happened last quarter, now we need to make some different choices this time around. The controller steps in and looks at that, and then you start looking at the assets that you need to bring in. You start looking at projections. You create those forecasts that say, okay, if we buy this piece of equipment and it's going to cost us this more, it's going to create this much revenue. You're having all those deeper conversations that you're certainly not going to have with the bookkeeper or even the accountant, and the controller is still providing that past information. So a CFO stepping in that function, and then when you decide you need that capital for that new piece of equipment, the CFO is going to be there, and it's going to be a perfect asset for you as you're talking to banks or investors when you're trying to raise that capital. Having a CFO on your side is vital, because they'll know the questions that need to be asked in that situation. They know the details. When you have somebody coming in and really looking at the terms of a loan from the perspective of bigger implications, it's different from looking at, at just the base. Okay, how much is my payment going to be? Okay, well, a bookkeeper can look at an invoice and go, oh, okay, that's how much my monthly payment is going to be. A CFO is going to work on those terms before you ever have to make that payment. The CFO is going to tell you what the implications short-term and long-term are. So, there's definitely an instance where somebody can come in and assist. And something that's also happening a lot in the accounting industry, it's, a lot of businesses might have heard the word advisory services, because they're getting advisory services from their tax preparer. And that's not, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing at all. It's a great thing when you're in that growing stage where you're not quite at needing somebody in-house, not quite at even a fractional level. Some advisory will be great, but you really have to gauge and understand that when your tax preparer says advisory services, they mean they can advise you around only the information that's available to them. Mm-hmm. You really need somebody who's seen the whole picture, that CFO that's going to step in and see what your bookkeeper is doing and what your accountant is doing and what your controller is doing and what your operations are doing and what you're doing as an owner, CEO, to really give you strong, action items. So that's something else to separate also, is the advisory and using expertise versus having somebody who has access to all the information and knows how to use that information.
And that's the value of a great strategist, right? To see what you see, but also see what you don't see, and then be able to help you shape the clear picture. Josefina Garcia is the smartest person in the room. I really enjoyed this conversation. I feel like you said cheat sheet. I feel like this is a cheat sheet for business leadership. I feel like this should be part of a, 101 in business kind of course, because there's so many organizations that just need to better understand who to put around them and what responsibilities they need and when. And this has been so valuable. Thank you so much. It was great to be with you. I can't wait to talk to you again.
Same here, Chris.
Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to our subscribers. Consider becoming one today. Visit ProCFOPartners.com for more strategies and ideas for financial management and growth to help you put your business's financial picture in context.